Finally, a new chapter. Let's talk about relationships in coding, not only in Laravel. Relationships refer to a connection between different entities in a database. In a relational database management system, what Laravel is, relationships are established using keys that define how different tables are connected to each other. Now you might wonder why we should even use relationships. Relationships are used to organize and manage data in a database effectively. By establishing relationships between different tables, it becomes easier to access and manage data, reducing data redundancy, and ensuring data integrity. They also help to improve the efficiency of database operations, such as querying and updating data. While relationships are essential in database management, there are also some disadvantages associated with their use. One disadvantage is that relationships can be complex to set up, especially for large projects with multiple tables. Another disadvantage is that relationships can lead to slower database operations, especially when dealing with large datasets. But setting up relationships correctly is crucial in big projects to ensure data consistency and accuracy. Properly establishing relationships ensure that data is stored and managed correctly. This makes it easier to manage and access data, leading to more efficient database operations. In summary, relationships are essential in database management. It helps you to organize and manage data effectively, while there obviously are some disadvantages associated with their use. Let's start off with our first relationship, which is the one-to-one relationship. The one-to-one relationship is used when we need to associate two tables with a unique relationship. In this case, one record of the first table is associated with one record of the second table. Simple as that. One use case of a one-to-one relationship is when we have a table with sensitive information that we want to keep separate from the main table. Think about the following example. We could have a user's table that contains basic information such as a name and email, password, and so on. But we want to keep the user's address, city, zip code, and all those other information in a separate table for security reasons. In this case, we could simply create a contact table and model with a one-to-one relationship to the user's table. Quick note, to define a relationship between two tables, we need to create two models, one for each table. We then define a relationship between the model in the respective classes. So you basically can't leave out the contact model because you have already defined the user model. Let's first create the needed model and migration through the command line interface. So let's navigate to the command line interface, and let's create a model and migration by saying PHP artisan make me a new model. Let's name it contact, and let's add a -m flag for the migration to it. So this has created our model and migration. So let's start off with the migration that we just created. Let's navigate to PHP Storm. Let's open the databases directory, migrations, and the latest one, which is the context table. And let's define a couple fields right here. Right below our primary key, we're going to create a foreign ID, which will be named user_ID. We're going to chain the constraint method to it, and it constrains the users. Finally, we're going to add the cascade on delete, because we want to delete the associated contact information when a user gets deleted. Let's add a couple extra fields right here. Let's say table, string, which will be our address. Then we have a table string, which is our basically house number. We have another field, which is also a string, which stands for the city. And we have the table string, which will be our zip code. And let's basically add our table object, chain the unique method, pass in an array because the address and the zip code should both be unique. So we're ready to run the context migration. So let's navigate to the CLI and let's run the PHP artisan migrate command, which will migrate our context table. Now that we have set up the migration, let's take a look at the relationship between the user and contact model. Now let's start off with the user model first. So let's navigate to PHP Storm, and we don't need our database directory for now, so let's close it. Open app, models, and user model. Now let's actually get rid of our booted methods because we won't be using that anymore. And whenever you want to define a relationship between tables in Laravel, you need to define a new method inside the model, where the method name will be the name of the related table. When defining a method, it is recommended to use a descriptive name that accurately reflects the relationship between the models. In our current example, we have a one-to-one relationship between the user and contact model. So let's say that we want to create a new method named contact. Now, did you notice something? The method name right here is singular. Singular method names represent a relationship with a single instance of another model. And since we're going to define a one-to-one relationship between a user and contact model, we should use a singular method name like contact for the relationship method on the user model. When we later will define a one-to-many relationship, we should use a plural method name like posts for the relationship method on the user model, since each user can have multiple posts. This convention helps making the code more readable and understandable. Now, inside the contact method, we need to define a one-to-one relationship between the user and contact model. Now, this can be done by adding the return keyword, where we need to tell Laravel that each user has one contact. And this can be achieved by returning a has1 relationship instance that is associated with the contact model. So we need to say return this and add a notation to the has1 method. Now, the this keyword is very important right here, since it is used to refer to the current instance of the model. It is needed when defining relationships between tables in Laravel because we need to specify which model we are defining the relationship on. So what we need to do right here is passing in the model that we want to specify for the relationship as an argument, which will be contact, : class. In Laravel, we add a : to the end of a class name to reference the class itself as an object. In the context of our current example, contact : class is used to pass in the contact model as an argument to the has1 method, which defines the one-to-one relationship between the user and contact models. Now, by default, Laravel uses the user ID column on the contact table to store the foreign key of the associated user. Right, we just defined it in our migration. But keep in mind that it is optional to add the foreign key column name here as well as a second argument, because Laravel will assume that the foreign key is the name of the current model with _ID appended to it, which in our case will be user _ID. So we have set it up correctly. However, we can customize this behavior by passing in the name of the foreign key column as a second argument to the has1 method. So let's say that instead of our user _ID column, we want to use the address as a foreign key, which makes zero sense, but I have to show you that it is possible. Now, by default, Laravel also assumes that the primary key column name is ID, but you can customize this behavior by adding a third argument, which represents the local key. So let's say that the primary key should not be ID, but it should be zip _code. Now let me actually align this on the line below for a moment. Alright. Which also, by the way, makes zero sense, but I'm a strong believer of setting up your database design correctly, following Laravel's conventions, so you don't need to change the primary key and its foreign keys through a relationship. But once again, I just wanted to show you the possibilities. For now, let's remove the second and third argument, because we're simply going to work with our contact class. And I can align it on one line again. What we have done right here is defining a one-to-one relationship between the user and contact model. It basically tells Laravel that each user has one contact. We could also define the inverse relationship, which needs to be done right inside of the contact model, where we need to define a new method named user, since one contact belongs to one user. Then we need to return the instance, which is this belongs to. And where it belongs to is basically the user model class. Now, just like the has1 relationship, the belongs to method takes 3 arguments. We have defined the first one, which is the related model class name. Then we have the second argument, which is the foreign key column name, which is optional. And finally, it has the local key column name, and the default is ID, so we could set it equal to something else as well. But for now, we're just going to stick to one argument. Now, this method right here defines the inverse of the one-to-one relationship. It basically tells Laravel that each contact belongs to one user. Now, before we navigate to Tinkerwell and play around with our code, we need to do 2 more things. So let's first type in this method to belongs to. And let's define our fillable property. So let's say protected fillable is equal to user _ID, address, number, city, zip code. Then we need to navigate back to our user model because we need to type hint our contact method as well to a has1. Now let's have a look at how we could insert data into related tables using a one-to-one relationship. Let's navigate to Tinkerwell. And there are basically two options right here. Step number one is simply using our user model, access the create method, where we could simply create a new user with the name of, let's say, code with Dary. We have an email, which is info@codewithdary. And we have a password, which we will set equal to test1234 exclamation mark. Once we perform our request, you'll see that we have created a new user. What we then can do is basically get rid of our query, use our contact model, also create a new row. So let's say that our user ID is equal to the user ID we have to our right of the user that we just created, which is 27. Then we have an address, which I'll basically add a test. We have a number, which will be 43. We have a city, which will be Utrecht. And we have a zip underscore code, which will be a random string of numbers with 2 characters. And save it, where you will see that we have created a new contact where the user ID is 27. Now this works fine, but there is even a better option. Let's undo what we just did, because I need my user query again. Alright, now let's instantiate it by setting it equal to a variable user. We're gonna name it codewithdary2, and my email will be info@codewithdary2 as well. Now let's define our user instance again, right at the bottom. Give me a moment. Alright, where we have access to the relationship we have just defined, which is the contact method. Then on the contact method, we could even chain another method, which is the create method, where we could simply pass in key value pairs that represents the columns in the context table with the value we would like to persist. Now both methods that we have performed have different use cases. The first method that we performed, so the contact : create, creates a new instance of the contact model and saves it to the database in one step, without associating it with any user instance. Now this is useful when you want to create a new contact instance that is not yet associated with any user instance. The second method that we have on our screen right now creates a new instance of the contact model and associates it with the current user instance in one single step. Let me say that again. It associates the contact with the current user. This basically eliminates setting the user underscore ID attribute manually to associate a new contact with an existing user instance. So let me show that in code. So what we did before was setting the user underscore ID equal to an ID of 27. Now that we're directly using our user instance, it will automatically set it behind the scenes. So we could get rid of it, where we could say, well, the address is test. The number is equal to a random number. We have the city, which will be Amsterdam right now. And we have the zip underscore code, which will be a random string as well. Now, if we run our code right now, you will see that we have created a user, but also a contact where it has used the newly created user ID. If we get rid of our queries and perform a user : all, scroll to the bottom, where you will see that we have created a user named codewithdary2. If we then say contact all, you'll see that we have persisted 2 contacts. One where the user ID is 27 and one where the user ID is 28. In the Eloquent chapter, we covered how we could show relationships. Now Laravel offers the with method, which is used to eager load data in a related model. And we will cover this a little bit more in depth later on. But for now, let's make a call to our user model and access the with method. And let's say that we want to show all users with their associated contact. Now let's change the find method because we want to find a user where the ID is 27. Now if I scroll up, you'll see that we have retrieved the user instance where the ID is equal to 27, but in the same query, we have also retrieved the contact details of a user. Now the final thing that I want to show you is how you could access the contact data using the contact property on the user object. So let's redefine a user instance, and let's set it equal to the user method find where the ID is 27. Then right below of it, we could use our user instance and chain the contact method. Now we don't need to add parentheses right here because we're accessing our property dynamically, which is called dynamic property accessing. Now let's chain the address right here. Once we perform our request, you will see that it has returned back with a string of our actual address. If the user does not have a contact associated with them, the contact property will be null. So if we chain our ID to, let's say, 1, you'll see that it returns back a warning, so no error, and the actual output is null. Let's have a look at the second relationship from this course, which is the one-to-many and the belongs to relationship, which is the inverse. Our current project setup is pretty much a real-life scenario where the one-to-many relationship would be useful. In our application, and in most blog applications, users can create multiple blogs, and each blog belongs to a specific user. By defining a one-to-many relationship, we can easily retrieve all the posts for a specific user and display them on their profile page. The one-to-many relationship ensures data integrity by allowing us to define a foreign key constraint between the tables. In this case, we can ensure that every post belongs to a valid user by adding a foreign key to the post table that references the ID column on the user's table. This ensures that all posts are associated with a valid user, which will then prevent orphaned posts. Additionally, by using the relationship, we can avoid redundancy in the database. Without the relationship, we might have to duplicate user information in every post record, such as the username and email. Now let's quickly double check what we have done in the migrations chapter, where we did set up a foreign key constraint on our post table. Inside our database directory, migrations, we have created a post table, where we have created a new column named user_id. We have chained the constraint method to it, which specifies the name of the related table, and we have added a cascade on delete method to it as well, which specifies that if a user is deleted, all of their associated posts should also be deleted to maintain referential integrity. Now with the code that we have defined right here, we could define our one-to-many relationship where we're going to start inside our user model. Now we need to create a new public function, and we need to add a plural method name right here because it defines a relationship where one user can have multiple posts. Therefore, the method name reflects the fact that it returns a collection of multiple posts. So we're going to name it posts, which is plural. Now inside our post method, we need to return the this keyword and the has many method. Now inside the has many method, we need to pass in the relationship method as an argument, which in our case will be the post model class. Let's actually type in it to a has many. Alright. Now this code that we have right here defines a one-to-many relationship between the user and post models in a Laravel application. Specifically, the has many method is used in the user model to define that a user has many posts. Now any relationship accepts one required parameter, which is the name of the related model, but it also accepts a second argument. So let me outline it on the line below again. Alright. By default, Laravel assumes that the foreign key column name is the name of the related model snake case followed by _ID. Since we have defined the user_ID column in the post model, Laravel will look for a foreign key column named user_ID in the post table. However, we can override this naming convention by passing in the name of the foreign key column as a second argument to the has many method or belongs to method. So we could say user_ID, and I forgot my comma right here. Now this is also the key that it grabs when we don't define it, but I'm just going to show you the arguments that you can pass in. It also accepts a third argument. In the context of the one-to-many relationship, the local key column is the user model, where the primary key is ID. This column is used to join the two tables together and retrieve the related post for a specific user. It is pretty useful because it provides a way to link the two tables together and retrieve the correct data. Now I'm not going to use both of them, so let's get rid of them and let me outline it in one single line again. Alright. Now then, we need to define the inverse relationship as well, which allows us to access the user data through the post model. So let's navigate to our post model, scroll to the bottom, and let's create a new public function. And we need to define a singular relationship to the user model, so let's say user. The reason why it's singular is because it defines a relationship where one model belongs to another model. In the context of the one-to-many relationship between the post and user model, each post is associated with a specific user, so the relationship name should be singular right here. Now inside our method, we need to return the keyword this and chain the belongs to methods, where we need to pass in one required argument, which is the associated model, which in our case is user : class. And don't forget to type in it to a belongs to. Now once again, this code right here defines a belongs to relationship between the post and user model in a Laravel application. Now just like any other relationship, it also accepts two optional arguments. The second argument is the name of the foreign key column in the current table, while the third argument is the name of the primary key column in the related table. I'm just going to mention it, but I won't add it again. Now that we have defined the relationship, let's see how we could retrieve related data inside Tinkerwell, which is pretty simple. First, we're going to retrieve one single post. So let's define a new post instance, and let's set it equal to the post model, and get a post where the ID is equal to 1000. Then on the line below, we could create a new user variable, which needs to come from our post instance, where we need to access a singular user method that we defined. Now keep in mind that we have retrieved one single user, so there's no need to loop over our users. In the output, you will see that we have retrieved the user instance that is associated with the post where the ID is equal to 1000. Let's double check that. Let's comment out our latest row, refresh the page, where you will see that the user ID is equal to 17. If we uncomment our line and perform our request, you'll see that the user that we retrieved has a user ID of 17. We could access individual attributes here as well by simply chaining the attribute name right after it. So let's say that we only want to output the user name, where you will see that Miss Ina Bihan MD has created a post where the ID is equal to 1000. Now using this method, you could create one single blog post where you could output user data with it. Now let's see how we could retrieve data the other way around as well. So let's get rid of the code that we have. Now let's define a new user instance and let's find a user where the ID is, let's say, 17. Right here, we have retrieved the same user again. Then on the line below, we could define a new variable named posts, which is plural because we can retrieve multiple posts, set it equal to our user instance, and chain posts to it. Once we perform our request, you will see a slight issue, and that's because it will return a collection with posts. The reason why it returns a collection is obviously because the has many relationship between the user and post model defines that the user can have many posts. So whenever you want to use it inside your Blade template to output a user, you simply need to get rid of this line, create a for each loop, loop over the user posts as one single post, and basically say, well, echo me out the title, which is our post title, and let's concatenate a break. In the output, you will see that we have outputted all the titles of a post where the user ID is equal to 17. The next relationship we're going to cover is the many-to-many relationship. And in a many-to-many relationship, we have multiple records in the first table associated with multiple records in the second table. Now, quick note, the many-to-many relationship is one of the more complex relationships that Laravel has to offer. Unlike the others, this type of relationship requires an additional table to store the relationships between the two tables. This additional table is called a pivot table, which plays a crucial role in the many-to-many relationship. Now, a real-life example of the many-to-many relationship is the relationship between students and classes. Each student can be enrolled in multiple classes, and each class can have multiple students. This type of relationship is often seen in educational institutions where students take multiple courses and classes have numerous students enrolled in them. The one relationship that we're going to create is the relationship between the posts and tags in our blog. Each post can have multiple tags, and each tag can be associated with multiple posts. This type of relationship allows for posts to be categorized and grouped together based on their content, making it easier for users to find related posts. As mentioned earlier, when defining a many-to-many relationship, we need an additional table to store the relationships between the two tables, which is obviously the pivot table. The pivot table basically allows us to store the relationships between the two tables and query the data easily without having to duplicate the same information in multiple tables. Now let's put our example into work. We first need to create a new model in migration. So let's navigate to the CLI, where we need to perform the PHP artisan make me a new model named tag. Now let's add a -m flag to it for the migration. This has created both files. Now let's navigate back to PHP Storm and let's open our latest migration, which is for the tags table. We're going to use our primary key and we're going to add a new column with a data type of string, where the name will be name, and we're going to chain the unique method to it. Now let's create another table where the data type is equal to a string again, where the column name is slug, and let's chain the unique method to it once again. Alright, now let's navigate back to iterm and run php artisan migrate, where you will see that our tags table has been created. And before we forget it, let's quickly navigate back to PHP Storm. Let's open our tag model, because I always forget to define the protected fillable property, which needs to be set equal to an array, where we're going to pass in the name, but also the slug. Alright, now that we have defined both the model and migration, let's start with our pivot table. Once again, we need to create a new migration. So let's navigate to iterm and let's run the php artisan make migrate command. But let's take a moment to talk about the naming of our pivot table. The table name should be a combination of the singular names of the two tables being related, separated by an underscore and in alphabetic order. Since we're going to create a pivot table for the post and tags table, the migration should be named create underscore post underscore tag underscore table. Once we hit enter, you will see that our migration is created. So let's navigate back to PHP Storm and let's open our migration. Now we don't need the primary key for our post tag table, so let's get rid of it, because the table will contain the foreign keys of both tables. These foreign keys serve as a composite primary key for the pivot table, ensuring that each relationship is unique. We also don't need the timestamps, so let's get rid of it as well, and that's because they are not required because it does not represent a standalone model with its own lifecycle. Which is correct, right? Since we have not created a post tag model. So instead, it serves only to store the relationship between two other tables. So there's no need to have a created underscore at and updated underscore at column on the pivot table. So what we're going to do right here is creating two foreign key constraints. So let's use our table object, chain the foreign ID method, where the column name will be post underscore ID. It is constrained on the table post, and it will be cascade on delete. We simply need to create one more column or foreign key through our table object. We're going to grab the foreign ID, which will be tag underscore ID. Then the constraint will be on the table tags, and we're also going to cascade it on delete. Now let's navigate to the CLI, where we're going to perform the php artisan migrate command to migrate our pivot table. And we're ready to create our relationships. So let's navigate back to PHP Storm and let's close all tabs that we have. And let's open our post model where I'm going to start. Right here, we need to define a plural method named tags. So let's say public function tags. And the reason why it's plural, because it defines a relationship between the post model and the tag model, and each post can have multiple tags. Inside the tags method, we need to define a many-to-many relationship with the tag model using the belongs to many method. So we need to return this belongs to many. Now the belongs to many method accepts two arguments, where one of them is required, which is the related model, which in our case will be tag : class. Quick note, the second argument is optional, as Laravel will automatically generate a pivot table name by combining the singular names of the two related models in alphabetic order. In this case, it will generate a table name named post_tag. If you want to use a table name such as, let's say, tag_post, you simply need to define it as a second argument. But for now, since we have set up our database correctly, we can get rid of it. Now we also need to define the inverse relationship. So let's open the tag model, and right under our protected fillable property, we're going to define a public function posts, so plural, where we're going to return this belongs to many. And it belongs to the post model. Now let's quickly type into it by saying belongs to many. Now let's do the same thing on the post model by saying colon belongs to many. Now let's see how we could play around with inserting and retrieving data through Tinkerwell. We first need to create a couple tags. So let's navigate back to Tinkerwell. Let's make a call to our tag model. Let's access the create method and let's pass in an array. We need to pass in two key value pairs right here. We have our name, which is equal to Laravel, and we have our slug, which will be equal to Laravel in lowercase. Once we perform our request, you will see that our first tag has been created. Now let's create a second one and let's name it Symphony. And the slug will be lowercase symphony, where you will see that our second tag has been created. Now the third tag will be Tailwind CSS, where the slug will be Tailwind CSS in lowercase without spaces, where you will see that we have created our third tag as well. Now let's retrieve all tags for a moment. So let's say tag : all. And right here, you will see that we have 3 new rows where the primary keys are 1, 2, and 3. Now let's see how we could insert data into our pivot table. Since we're not working with any request, I prefer to define a new variable named tag IDs, and I want to set it equal to an array. And don't worry, we will be defining the same exact relationship in our project in the next chapter with a front end. So we're basically going to add the 3 tag IDs that we have right here. So let's say 1, 2, and 3. Now before we could insert data in the pivot table, we need to have our post instance. So let's make a simple request on the line below. Let's say post instance is equal to post find, where the ID is 1000. And whenever you want to insert data in the pivot table, you need to use the post instance, where you need to chain the tags method to it that we have defined, but we also need to chain the attach method to it, which is a method that is used to insert data into the pivot table, where it will associate the post with tags with the given IDs. So in our case, it will associate the post ID of 1000 to tags ID 1, 2, and 3. So let's pass in our tag IDs. If we perform our request right now, we would add 3 new rows into our post_tag table. Now this is a weird thing in a many-to-many relationship because it returns null. This means that the method does not return any value, but it inserts the data into the pivot table. Now since we don't have a post tag model, we need to navigate to PHP Storm for a moment, open our database client, and refresh it, where you will see that our post tag table has been created. And once we open it, you will see that we have inserted 3 new rows, where the post ID are all equal to 1000, coming from our post instance right here, where the tag IDs, so 1, 2, and 3, are equal to the tag IDs variable that we have created. Now we obviously want to make sure that we could output data from the pivot table as well to the end user. So we currently have one single post right here. So get rid of our latest query, where we will attach rows, and it's very simple to output variables. Since we're retrieving multiple tags, we need to loop over all of our tags. So let's define a for each loop, where we're going to loop over our post instance tags as one single tag. What we could do then inside our for each loop is simply echo out our tag variable. Once we perform our request, you will see that behind the scenes, it has made a call to the tags table based on the tag _ID in the pivot table, and it has retrieved all fields. So we have our ID of 1, which is equal to Laravel. We have our ID equal 2, which is equal to Symphony. And we have the third value, which is ID number 3, which has a name of Tailwind CSS. Next to attaching data, Laravel also allows you to use the detach method. And the detach method is used to remove data from a many-to-many relationship. It allows you to remove the association between a model and its related models by removing the corresponding records from the pivot table. Quick note right here, you could either detach a single tag from a post or multiple, but let's start off with a single tag. So let's get rid of our for each loop. Now let's use our post instance, tags method, and let's chain the detach method to it. We could pass in one single value right here, so let's say 1. Or we could pass in an array and detach 2 items by saying 1 and 2, which should be equal to the tag ID. Or you could use the detach method without any arguments, which will detach all tags from the post, which basically means that it will remove all of them. So let's start off by detaching one item. Once we perform our request, where you will see that it returned back 1, meaning that one row has been detached. If we navigate back to PHP Storm, refresh our table, you'll see that we have indeed deleted one post tag item. If we navigate back to PHP Storm, remove our argument, perform a request, you'll see that 2 rows have been affected. If we navigate back to PHP Storm and refresh it, you'll see that our post_id and tag_id columns are both empty. Now we obviously don't want to be stuck without the data right here forever, right? We do need to have a chance to make changes. Laravel allows you to update a single record on the intermediate table, and it's super easy using their magic method. We do need to insert data inside our pivot table first. So let's say post tags, attach, and what we're going to attach is the tag IDs. Once we perform our request, it returns back null, so let's do a double check by refreshing our post_tag table. So it has inserted 3 new rows. Now let's navigate back and let's get rid of our line right here. And let's create a new tag, which we will update with a tag where the ID is equal to 1. So let's say tag : create. We're going to create a tag with a name of updated and a slug of updated as well. Perform our request. You'll see that we have created a new tag. So let's get rid of our query. Then we could use our post instance again, chain the tags method, and then we could chain the update existing pivot method to it. And this is a method that allows you to update a single record on the intermediate table. It accepts 2 arguments. The ID of the related model, which in our case will be 1. So we're basically going to update tag ID number 1, which is also the first row inside our post tag table. Then we need to pass in an array. Now let me scroll down for a moment. So we're going to pass in an array right here of attributes that we want to update. So let's say that we want to set the tag_id equal to the ID of the tag that we just created, which is equal to 4. If we perform our request, you'll see that it returns back 1, meaning that one row has been affected. If we navigate back to PHP Storm and refresh our post_tag table, you'll see that we have updated the tag ID where it was 1 and we have set it equal to 4. We have defined the inverse relationship as well, and everything we have performed up until this point works in the same exact way with the tag model as well. So let's navigate back to Tinkerwell. Let's replace the tags ID variable that we have with a post IDs variable. Let's set the IDs inside our array equal to 1000, 1001, and 1002. We're not going to find a specific post, but we're going to create a tag instance and set it equal to our tag model and add the find method and find a tag where the ID is, let's say, equal to 2. Then we're going to use our tag instance and chain the posts method and chain the attach method to it, where we're simply going to add the post IDs that we have. If we perform our request, you'll see that it returns back null. If we navigate back to PHP Storm, refresh our table, you'll see that we have inserted 3 new rows where the tag ID is equal to 2, coming from our tag instance that we have defined. And we have basically said, well, the post ID needs to be 1000, 1001, and 1002, coming from our post IDs variable. Now let's have a look how we could output it through a for each loop. We could simply say for each, loop over our tags instance, but then the posts as one single post, where we could say, well, echo out the post that we have. And in the output, you'll see that we have retrieved all the posts based on the tag. If you're working with Laravel, you might have heard of eager loading, and I know that I've mentioned it a couple times already. Eager loading is a technique for loading related data upfront, instead of loading it lazy when it is needed. In other words, eager loading loads all the necessary data in advance. Now you might wonder, why is eager loading useful? And when you're new to coding and only work on localhost, you won't see a huge difference when it comes to eager loading. Eager loading is useful because it helps you to reduce the number of queries that are executed on your database. By loading all the necessary data upfront with eager loading, you can avoid the need for multiple queries every time you access a related module. When you're not using eager loading, Laravel will pretty much execute a separate query for each related module that you'll access. This means that if you have a collection of 1000 posts and you access their tags, Laravel will execute 1000 separate queries to load the tags. But when you use eager loading, Laravel will execute a single query that loads all the related data up front. Now let's have a look at the difference between the post : all method and the post : with method. In Laravel, using the post : all method loads all the posts from the database along with the related data that is defined in the model's relationship. This uses lazy loading. On the other hand, we have the post : with method, where you need to pass in the name of the relationship that you want to eager load. So let's say that along with the post module, we want to eager load the tags relationship as well. Once we perform our query, you will see that we have retrieved one single post, but within that one single post, you'll see that it has added the tags data as well. So we have the first tag, second tag, and maybe the third one, yes, the third tag as well. Now let's have a look at the difference in the query. If we perform our request right now with the query, you will see that it performs a select all from the post table, but it uses a inner join query as well. Right here, we have eager loaded all necessary data up front. Now if we get rid of our line of code right here and perform our request with the post : all method, compared to the other method, which will execute a single query that loads all the related data up front. Quick summary, eager loading is a powerful tool for improving performance in Laravel. By loading related data up front, you can avoid the need for multiple queries and improve the speed of your application. Just remember to use eager loading when you'll need related data for a collection of models, and use lazy loading when you don't. One pretty interesting relationship in Laravel is the has-one-true relationship. It's pretty difficult to find a working example without needing to create 3 new migrations, but I try to make the most out of it using the user, company, and phone number model. So let's talk about what the has-one-true relationship is. In Laravel, the has-one-true relationship allows you to define a direct association between 2 models through a third intermediate model. This relationship is useful when you need to access the data of the intermediate model to retrieve the data of the second model. So when is it useful? Well, in the numerous situations, and one of them is when you have a relationship between 2 models that is not direct, but has a model in between that connects them. Let's see how it works in our example. We have a user that works for a company, and a company has a phone number. The phone number belongs to the company, but we need to go through the user to get it. And this is where the has-one-true relationship comes in handy. We do need to create 2 new models and migrations. So let's navigate to the CLI, and let's perform the PHP artisan make me a new model named company, and let's add a -m flag. And let's also say PHP artisan make me another model named phone number, and let's add a -m flag to it as well. Once we hit enter, you'll see that both of them have been created. So let's navigate back to PHP Storm, and let's start by defining our migrations first. And we're going to start off with the company's migration. Now next to the primary key, we're going to define a string with the name of name. And then we need to define the foreign key. So let's say table foreign ID with the name of user_ID. it should constrain on the table users, cascade on delete method to it as well. And let me outline this. Now let's open our next migration, which is the phone numbers migration. Once again, we don't need to add a foreign ID of user ID on the phone numbers table because the relationship between the phone numbers and users is not direct. Instead, we're going to create a new table of string, which is a number, and it should be unique. Then we need to create a foreign key constraint on the company's table. So let's say table, foreign ID. The column name is company underscore ID. It is constrained on the table companies. And we're going to add the cascade on delete to it as well. We are ready to migrate our migrations. So let's navigate to the CLI and let's run php artisan migrate. As you could see, our companies table and phone numbers table have both been created. And before we dive into creating content, we need to make sure that we set our fillable properties for both models, since we need to insert data into the database as well. So let's navigate back to PhpStorm. Let's scroll up and open first our company model. Let's define a protected fillable property, which is equal to an array, where we're going to pass in the name and the user underscore ID. And we need to do the same thing for our phone number model, where we have a protected fillable, which is equal to an array, where we're going to pass in the number and the company underscore ID. Now let's work on the relationship right now. And let me close off all the unnecessary files that we have. We need to make sure that we define a relationship. And even though we have 3 models, we only need to define one relationship inside the user model. The user model has or works for one company, and the company has one phone number. So let's define a new public function, and let's talk about the naming convention for a moment, because it will be a little bit different than what we have done in this chapter. Now, the method name for the has-one-true relationship follows the convention of combining the names of the 2 related models in alphabetic order. Now, our user model belongs to a company that has a phone number. So our method name will be company phone number. You could name it company as well, but I personally find this weird because it could also be the phone number of a user. So I prefer to add a company prefix right in front of it. Inside of it, we're going to return this has one true. Now let's type into it directly by saying has one true. Now let's talk about the required and optional arguments inside the has-one-true method, since there is a total of 6, where only the first 2 are required. The first argument is the fully qualified name of the model that owns the relationship. In our case, it will be the phone number class. The second argument is the fully qualified class name of the model we are joining to, which will be the company model. The third argument is the name of the foreign key on the joining table that references the model that owns the relationship, which in our case will be user underscore ID on the company's table. The fourth argument is the name of the foreign key on the joining table that references the model we are joining on, which in our case will be the company underscore ID on the phone number model. The fifth argument is the name of the local key on the model that owns the relationship, which in our case will be ID. And finally, we have the name of the local key on the model we are joining on, which in our case will also be a primary key of ID. If you have set up all your tables correctly with the right foreign key names, you don't need to pass in the last 4. And since we did, I just want to get rid of it. Let me also align it on one single line. All right. Now let's see how we could retrieve data through Tinkerwell. Well, we first need to make sure that we create data for the company model and also for our phone number model. But let's start off with our company model first. So let's say company, colon create. Let's just add random data right here by saying the name is equal to Apple, while the user underscore ID is equal to, let's say, 17. Once we perform our request, you'll see that we have created one company. Now we could get rid of our query because we can define the phone number model, create. where we could pass in an array where the number is just a random string of numbers, where the company underscore ID is equal to the company that we just created, which has an ID of 1. If we perform our request, you'll see that we just created our phone number. Now, to access the phone number from our user model, we first need to create a new user instance. So let's say user is equal to user : find. And the user that we're going to find has an ID of 17. And here comes the thing. We could basically perform our query and say, well, user, get me the company phone number and get me the values. Where in the output, you'll see that we retrieved the company phone number, but we could also get rid of our line and chain it right after the find method by saying company phone number. Now let's get the values, which will output the same exact thing. Alternatively, we could also use eager loading by chaining the with method and the get method, where we could say get me the company phone number. Once we perform our request, you'll see that we retrieved 1 user. And if we scroll down, you'll see that the company phone number for some users are null. And I think the ID was 17. Let me scroll down, which is right here, where you will see that the company phone number of user ID is equal to 17 is equal to 1. The next relationship is the has one of many relationship. Imagine you have a job portal where users can apply for multiple jobs and you want to either retrieve the first or last job. That is where the has one of many relationship comes in handy. We already have our user migration and model defined, so we need to create the jobs model and migration. So let's navigate to the CLI and let's perform the PHP artisan make me a new model named job, and let's add a -m flag to it, which will create both the model and migration file for us. The next step is defining the jobs migration. So let's navigate back to PHP Storm. Let's open our latest migration. And right under our primary key of ID, we're going to create a new table string with the name of title. Then we need to create a description, which will be a text column to store a description of the job. So let's say table text, which will be description. Then we need to create a foreign key column by saying table foreign ID, which will be user underscore ID. It is constraint on the table's users, and we will say cascade on delete. Finally, we're going to add one more field right here, which will be table boolean, which is active, and it has a default of false. With the foreign key constraint that we added a column to link the job to a user. So let's focus on our relationship. Let's close off our migration. Let's actually navigate back to iTerm and run the PHP artisan migrate command first before we forget that. Let's navigate back to PHP Storm and we're going to work inside our user model. So let's open it and scroll to the bottom. And we're going to define 2 methods here, which are pretty useful when it comes to the has one of many relationship. But before we do that, let's take a moment and talk about the naming of those methods, because it's a little bit different than other relationships. When defining a has one of many relationship method, it is recommended to use a name that describes the relationship in a clear and concise manner. Now we're going to find the latest and first job of a user. So we need to name our method a latest job, which indicates that it retrieves the latest job the user had. So let's say public function latest job. The method we're going to return right here is the one that we have used before, which will be this has one, where we're going to pass in the job model. And this method right here establish a has one relationship between the user and job model, where the user has many jobs, but we only want to retrieve the latest job. To do so, we don't need to write any logic, because Laravel has already did that for us. We can simply chain the latest of many method to it. This method is used to retrieve only the latest job of a user. It basically sorts the jobs by their created _ add timestamp in descending order and returns only the first one. Now let's type hint it real quick to a has one. Alright. And once again, we need to define our fillable property inside the job model because we will create a job through Tinkerwell. So let's say job model, create a protected fillable property, which is equal to an array. And the fields that are enabled for mass assignment will be the title, the description, the user underscore ID, and the active column. Now let's navigate to Tinkerwell for a moment, because we first need to create, let's say, 3 new jobs. Also, we're going to stick to the user where the user ID is equal to 17, just like the previous examples. So let's say job, create. Let's say that the title is equal to a junior web developer. The description will be equal to, let's say, test. Doesn't matter. The user ID is equal to 17. And the active column is equal to true. Once we perform our request, you'll see that we have created 1 new job. Let's create a second one of meteor web developer. And the last one will be a senior web developer. Once we perform our request, we've created our 3rd job. Now, user with ID number 17 had 3 jobs. First one was a junior web developer, the second one was a meteor web developer, and he is now a senior web developer. What we could do next is basically get rid of our query. We could basically use our user model, say that we want to find a user where the ID is 17, and we can chain the latest job method to it and get the values. If we perform our request, you will see that it returned back the senior web developer, and that's because this row has been entered as last. Now, in the same exact way how we defined the, let me open it, a latest job method, we could also get the oldest job method, where we simply need to return the same method. So this has a 1, it has a job model, and we're going to chain the oldest of many methods to it. Let's type into it to a has1 method. All right. If we navigate back to Tinkerwell, we could replace the latest job with the oldest job. Where in the output, you will see that the first job of the user with ID number 17 has been retrieved, which is junior web developer. Quick summary, we just explored the has1 of many relationship in Laravel and used the users and jobs model as an example. We've covered the oldest of many method and the latest of many method and explained every step in detail. Let's talk about the next relationship in this course, which is the has-many-true relationship, which is useful when you want to retrieve data through a many-to-many relationship where the intermediate table has an additional column beyond the foreign keys. Before we dive into the implementation, let's first discuss a real-life scenario where the has-many-true relationship is useful. Think about a social network application where users can create posts and each user is associated with a country. In this scenario, we have 3 models: user, post, and country. The country model is associated with many users, and each user is associated with many posts. The has-many-true relationships comes in handy right here, where we want to retrieve all the posts associated with a particular country, without defining a relationship between both. Now let's dive into the implementation of the has-many-true relationship. We have already created the user and post model and migration, so we only need to create one more model and migration, which is for the country. So let's navigate to the CLI, and let's perform the PHP artisan make me a model named country, and let's add a -m flag to it. But we also need to add a foreign ID on our users table. So let's create a new migration for that as well. Let's say PHP artisan make me a new migration. Let's name it add country underscore ID to the users table. And we're going to add an option right here of _table, which is equal to users. Once we hit enter, we created 2 migrations, so we can navigate back to PHP Storm. And let's actually start off with the countries migration first. So right here, we're simply going to add 2 additional columns. Next to the ID and timestamp, we're going to add a string data type with a column name of name, and the value should be unique. Then for the second column, we're also going to use a data type of a string, and the name is code, and this one should also be unique. And this will basically be the alpha store code of a country. So United States will have a code of USA. Now then, we need to add the foreign key constraint on our users table. So right here, we could basically say table, foreign ID, which will be country underscore ID. And we're not going to add the constraint and cascade on delete method because they're used to specify that the country ID column on the users table is a foreign key that references the ID column on the countries table, and that it should cascade on delete. In other words, if a country is deleted, all associated users will also be deleted, and we don't want to do that. So let's navigate to the CLI, let's run the php artisan migrate command, and let's define the has many true relationship in our country model first. So let's navigate back, let's close the migrations that we have, and let's open the country model. And just like any other episode, let's talk about the naming convention of the method for a moment. The naming convention for a has many true relationship method is to use the name of the target model, which is the post model in our case, in a plural form, which will be posts. So let's say public function posts. Inside our post method, we need to return this has many true, which is used to define the relationship. And let's quickly type hint it as well. All right. Now the has many true relationship method requires two required arguments. The first argument is the name of the final model we wish to access, which in our case will be the post model. The second argument is the name of the intermediate model, which obviously is the user model, because it joins the final model to the country model. Now next to the two required arguments, we could pass in a total of 4 optional arguments to customize the keys on the intermediate table. So let me actually outline it on the line below, where the third argument will be the foreign key on the user's table, which in our case will be the country underscore ID. And I forgot the comma again. All right. The fourth argument will be the foreign key on the post table, which will be user underscore ID. Then for the last 2 arguments, we need to add the 2 local keys on both the countries and users table, which in both cases will be ID. Now this was just for demonstration purposes, so let's get rid of all 4 optional arguments and let's continue on. The relationship that we have defined right here allows the country model to retrieve all posts associated with the related user models. So before we navigate to Tinkerwell to play around with queries, let's quickly add our fillable property right above our method, which is equal to an array, and we're going to pass in the name and also the code. So we're ready to navigate to Tinkerwell, so let's do that. And let's create a new country by calling our country model, create. We're going to pass in an array and the name will be, let's say, Netherlands, where the code will be NL. Now this will create a new row inside our database where the ID is equal to 1, the name is the Netherlands, and the country code is NL. If we retrieve the same user we used inside the last episode by saying user find ID 17, you will see that the country ID right at the bottom doesn't exist. So let's update it. So let's say user where the ID is equal to 17. Now let's change the update method to it. Pass in an array where we're going to update the country underscore ID and we're going to set it equal to the country ID we just created, which is an ID of 1. If we perform our request, you'll see it returned back with 1, meaning that 1 row has been affected. Now let's double check that real quick by saying a user find 17, where you will see that the country ID has been updated from 0 to 1. Now let's quickly double check to see whether our user has posts. So let's change the with method with posts. Let's say that the where clause, the ID needs to be 17, and let's get the values. If we perform our request, you'll see that we retrieved user with ID number 17, and the user does indeed have a couple posts right here. So let's get started. Let's create a new instance of our country by setting it equal to the country model, find the ID of 1, which works because we just retrieved the country where the name is equal to the Netherlands. Now through our country instance, we should be able to access the posts. We don't need to add the parentheses right here because it's a dynamic property that Laravel automatically resolves to the results of the query. And this is pretty much a feature of Laravel which has magic. Once we perform our request, where you will see that we have retrieved all the posts of one specific country. This chapter will be a lot more complex than the previous one, since we're going to cover probably the most fancy word in coding, which is polymorphic relationships. Now let's talk about why we even use polymorphic relationships. And it's pretty simple. It helps you to reduce data redundancy, as we don't have to create a separate table for each relationship. They also provide a lot more flexibility, as they allow us to create complex relationships between models. Another advantage of using polymorphic relationships in Laravel is that they make it easier to manage relationship between models. Instead of having to deal with multiple tables, we can make one single table, which makes the code much cleaner and easier to maintain. Like I've been saying throughout this entire course, every advantage has its own disadvantages, as one of them is its complexity. Polymorphic relationships can be more complex to implement, and they may not be suitable for all projects. An example where polymorphic relationships may not be suitable is where there are only a few relationships between tables, and the overhead of implementing polymorphism may not be worth it. In such case, regular relationships may be more appropriate. The second disadvantage is its performance overhead. Polymorphic relationships can have a performance overhead, as they require additional queries to retrieve related data. In Laravel, a polymorphic one-to-one relationship allows a model to belong to more than one other model on a single association. Now you might wonder why a polymorphic relationship right here is useful compared to the quote-unquote regular one-to-one relationship. Well, let me sum it up for you. First, it reduces the code duplication and it will improve the maintainability. It allows for more flexible database schemas and it makes it easier for database queries and joins. A real-life example of a polymorphic one-to-one relationship could be a messaging system. You might have a message model that can belong to either a user or a group. In this case, the user and group models would be associated with a message model through a polymorphic one-to-one relationship. Defining such relationships is useful when you have multiple models that share a common relationship. It also allows you to create a single relationship that can be used across multiple models. Now the example that we will be using in this is for storing images that can belong to either a user or a post. And we need to start off creating our image model and migration first. So let's navigate to the CLI, where we need to perform the PHP artisan make me a new model named image, and let's add a -m flag to it. Now let's start off by creating the migration for the images table. So let's navigate back to PHP Storm. Let's open the databases directory, migrations, where we have at the bottom our images table. Now quick note, I'm not going to work on the functionality behind the relationship where we will store an actual image. This is just for demonstration purposes. So next to our primary key, we're going to use our table object to create a string column with the name of URL. Then we need to define a table unsigned big integer. And let me add the semicolon right here. All right. The reason why we use an unsigned big integer is that it can store the ID of the associated model, which is either the user or post model in this example, in the polymorphic one-to-one relationship. Since IDs are always positive, unsigned integers are used to make more efficient use of the available storage space. So we're going to name it imageable_ID. Then we're going to use our table object one more time to create another string with a name of imageable_type. We're ready to migrate our migration. So let's navigate to the CLI and let's run the php artisan migrate command. Now next, we need to add the relationships to our models. And we're going to start off inside PHP Storm with the image model. So right under our trait. Now like I have mentioned before, the image model is used to represent an image that can belong to either a user or a model. It's either one of them. So we need to create a singular method right here. So let's say public function, and we're going to name it imageable. Inside our method, we need to return this morph_to. Now the morph_to method is used in the image model right here to define the inverse of the relationship. This method will return the related model for a given image based on the imageable_ID and imageable_type columns in the images table. Now let's type hint it to the morph_to. And now that we're here, let's define our protected fillable property as well, where we're going to pass in the URL, the imageable_ID, and also the imageable_type. Now let's open our user model right now because we need to define a relationship right here as well. So let's scroll to the bottom Now let's define a new public function and let's name it image. Right here, we need to return this morph1. And the morph1 method on a model is used to define a polymorphic one-to-one relationship with another model. The first argument of the morph1 method is the related model, which in our case will be the image class. Then we have our second argument, which is the name of the relationship, which we just have defined right here, which is named imageable. So let's pass in a string of that name. Now, since we're defining a one-to-one relationship, we can pretty much copy our entire method right here and paste it inside the post model as well, right at the bottom. So let's type int it to a morph1. Now let's add it inside the user model as well. So morph1. All right. And we're ready to create records with a polymorphic one-to-one relationship. And honestly, I'm not sure if you are ready to see some Laravel magic right here. So let's navigate to Tinkerwell. And first, we need to define a new user instance to find a record. So let's say variable user is equal to the user model. And let's find the user where the ID is equal to 5. Once we output it, you'll see that we just retrieved the user. Now, let's define a new variable. Let's name it image. And let's set it equal to our user instance. And let's chain the image method to it, where we can then chain the create method to it as well. The create method is used to create a new image record with the given attributes. Now what we need to do right here is basically pass in an array where we only need to add one key value pair, because the other two fields will be set behind the scenes. So what we need to do right here is basically pass in the URL, and we're going to set it equal to the https://example.com/image.jpg. Now let's perform our request. The output right here represents a record in the imageable table after creating a new image record with a polymorphic one-to-one relationship. The URL that we have right here specifies the URL of the image. The imageable_ID contains the ID of the associated records, which in our case will be the ID of the user right here. Then we have the imageable_type, which contains the class name of the associated record, which is also correct because it's the user model. And we have both the updated_at and the created_at fields, which both contains the timestamps of the last update and creation of the record. And finally, each record has its own primary key. Now what we could do right here, basically through our user object, let's comment out what we have, is basically saying, well, get me the user, but the image property. In the output, you will see that we have retrieved the associated image to the user where the ID is equal to 5. Pretty cool, isn't it? Let's see how this works with our post model this time, which will add data in the same table. Let's get rid of our image, and let's uncomment what we have right here. And I'm not going to explain all steps right here, since we basically need to perform the same code, but we need to change the user model to the post model. And let's rename our instance to post. Now let's use it inside our variable right here as well. So let's say post. All right. Now if we perform the request, you'll see an error message because the post doesn't exist. So let's change the ID to 1000. Once we perform our request, you will see that we have inserted an image for the post model, as you could see right here in the imageable_type, in the same table where we have set the image of our user. So let's double check that. Let's remove what we have right here because we don't need it. Let's make a call to our image model and let's get all values. Where you will see that we basically have two items. We have ID number 1, which has an imageable_ID of 5, which is coming from the user model. And then in the same table, we have ID number 2, which has an imageable_ID of 1000, which is equal to the post. And like it's saying in the imageable_type attribute, it is coming from the post model. We can also query records with a polymorphic one-to-one relationship by using the where_has method. So let's see how that works. Let's get rid of our query. Let's define a new variable by saying posts with images. And let's set it equal to our post model. And let's access the where_has method to it. The where_has method is used to query for related models that meet a certain condition. In this case, we're going to check if the post model has a related image model where the URL field contains the string of example. So let's pass in the image because it needs to have an image, and we're going to pass in a callback function. So function parentheses curly braces. Then inside the parentheses of our function, we're going to pass in a query. Then inside our function, we're going to use that query, chain the where method, and we're going to check where the URL, so basically the URL of one item right here, comma, second argument of the like SQL operation, has something which is a $, example.com, $. And this is just basic MySQL stuff right here. Finally, let's chain the get method to it. Once we perform our request, you'll see that we have retrieved one single post, where you will see that we have retrieved one post where the ID is equal to 1000. And that's correct because this specific post has one image inside the imageable table. Quick summary, we have learned how to create a polymorphic one-to-one relationship in Laravel with a post, user, and image model. We covered the benefits of using the polymorphic one-to-one relationship, provided a real-life example, explained why it is useful, and included code snippets for creating and querying records. In Laravel, we could also define a one-to-many polymorphic relationship, which is used to define a relationship where a single model owns any amount of related models. Polymorphic relationships are used when you need to relate a single model to multiple models in a single association. In this tutorial, we will be using polymorphic in Laravel between three models: the post model, the video model, and the comment model. Before we do so, let's quickly have a look at another example so you can get a better understanding of what it actually is. A real-life example of a one-to-many polymorphic relationship is a block that can have multiple comments, but those comments can come from different types of users, such as registered users or anonymous users. When you define a polymorphic relationship right here, you can easily associate those comments with the post without having to create separate tables for each type of user. Before we start, we obviously need to create two new models and migrations. So let's navigate back to the CLI, where we will perform the PHP artisan make model command, and let's name it video-m. Then we need to create one more by saying PHP artisan make me a new model, let's name it comment, and let's add a -m flag to it. Now let's navigate back to PHP Storm, and let's scroll down because I want to start off with my videos migration. So right after my primary key, I'm going to define a table string, which will be the title of the video. I would need another table, which will also be a string, where the column name will be URL. Now let's add one more. The data type is text, and the column name will be description. Now let's open our comments migration file, which is the last one. Now let's create this one as well. So right after our primary key, we're going to create a table text, which will be the body of the comment. Then I'm going to create a new table, unsigned big integer, with the name of commentable_ID. Then one more, because we're going to create a string, which will be the commentable_type. Right here, the commentable_ID field will store the ID of the related model, where the comment_type field will store the class name of the related model. By using both of these fields, Laravel can determine which model the comment model is related to and retrieve the correct data from the database. So let's put it into work. Let's navigate back to the CLI, because we do need to run the PHP artisan migrate command to migrate our tables. Alright, now that we pretty much have our migration set up, we can define the relationships between them. In both the post and video model, we need to define the same plural comments methods, since one of our posts or video can have many comments. So let's navigate back to PHP Storm. Let's scroll up and let's start inside our video model. Right here, we're going to define a public function comments, which will return this morph many. And let's type into it to the morph many as well. Alright. Now we need to pass in two arguments inside the morph many method. The first argument is the related model that you want to use, which in our case will be the comment class. The second argument is the name of the morphable field, which will be commentable. Now, before we continue, let's define our protected fillable property, which we will set equal to the values of title, URL, and also the description. Let's actually just copy the comments method because it's overkill to go over every step once again. Let's navigate to our post model, and right at the bottom, simply just paste it. Finally, we need to define the commentable method inside the comment model. And this is once again necessary for Laravel to determine which model, so either the post or video, the comment is associated with and retrieve the correct data from the database. So let's open our comment model, and right under our trait, let's say public function commentable, where we will return this morph2. Now let's type hint it. Alright. Let's define our protected fillable again, which will be equal to body, commentable underscore ID, and the commentable underscore type. So we're ready to insert data in Tinkerwell. And whenever you want to insert using the one-to-many relationship, you first need to instantiate a new post. So let's do that. Let's clean up what we have right here. Let's say post instance is equal to the post model, and let's find me a post where the ID is equal to 1000. Let's define a new variable right below of it named comment. And let's set it equal to our post instance. Let's chain the relationship that we have created on our post model, which is comments. And let's chain the create method to it. Now inside our create method, we're gonna pass in an array where we only need to add one key value pair. We don't need to add the commentable underscore ID or the commentable underscore type, since this will be done behind the scenes. We only need to define the body, which we will set equal to, let's say, this is a new comment. Once we perform our request, you'll see the same output as the last video, but I'm just gonna cover it once again real quick. The body right here is the text content of the comment. The commentable underscore ID is the ID of the related model. The commentable underscore type is the class name of the related model, which is post in this case. We have the timestamps, which both obviously make sense. And finally, we have the primary key of ID. Now, since we have a one-to-many relationship, we could make a change to our body value, perform it again, where you will see that a second row has been inserted. So let's see how we could output the comments of a post, which pretty much goes through the same exact way as you do with a regular one-to-many relationship. Since we have many comments, we can simply say, well, get me the post, comments. Well, we technically can because it's a collection and is returning back comment where ID is number 1, but also where the ID is number 2. But usually you want to create something like a for each loop for it, where you loop over your post instance, the comments, as one single comment, where you then will echo out the comment, let's say the body, and we're going to concatenate a break. Which didn't work, but you'll see what I tried to do. This is a new comment, and this is a new comment too, have both been printed out. Now, similar to what we just did, we could use a video model with the comments relationship. But before we could do that, we obviously need to create a new video inside our database. So let's say video, create. Let's pass in 3 key value pairs right here. We have the title, which is John Wick. Then we have the URL, which is equal to I don't have the rip yet, and don't tell anyone. Then we have the description, which is equal to Keanu Reeves is awesome. Once we perform our request, you will see that our video has been created. So let's create 2 new comments for it as well. Let's get rid of a query. Let's say video is equal to the video model. Find me where the ID is 1. Then let's define a comment, which is equal to our video instance. Comments method, create, and we're simply going to create the same comment by saying the body is equal to this is a new comment. Once we perform our request, you will see that it has been added inside the same table because the ID is equal to 3, where the body is equal to this is a new comment, the commentable ID is equal to 1, which is the video ID from the video model. Now if we try to retrieve the video, you'll see that it only returned 1 where the ID is equal to 3. Now to double check it one more time, let's make a call to our comment model and chain the all method. where you will see that we have retrieved 3 comments. The first one is ID number 1, the model is post, the second one as well. Then for the third one, you'll see that we have the video model, where the ID is equal to 3. Quick summary, we have learned how to create a one-to-many relationship using Polomorphic in Laravel between 3 models, the post, video, and comment. We have also discussed the advantages of using this relationship, and we have provided a real-life example as well. Next to the quote-unquote regular one-of-many relationship, Laravel also offers the one-of-many polymorphic relationship. Now let's see how this works with the 3 models that we have used before, the user model, the image model, and the post model. Just like the regular relationship, the polymorphic relationship also offers the latest of many and the oldest of many methods to retrieve the latest and oldest related model in a one-of-many polymorphic relationship. In the example of 2 videos ago, we can use these methods to retrieve the latest or oldest image related to the user or post model. We have already set up our migrations, so let's dive into the models, starting with the user model. We're going to define 2 methods right here, which will retrieve the latest image and the oldest image. So I basically spoiled the names. So let's define a public function, latest image. And right below of it, we're going to define a public function, oldest image. Inside our latest method, we're going to return this morph1 to a image model class. Then for the second argument, we need to pass in the imageable method inside the image method. I forgot a colon right here. Alright, let's type int it to a morph1. And we can basically copy the return statement and paste it inside the oldest image method. Now just like with the one-of-many relationship, we need to chain the latest of many method to the relationship inside the latest image method. So let's say latest of many. The same thing needs to be done for the oldest method, where we could chain the oldest of many. Now let's see how we could retrieve data, which is also in the same exact way of using the one-of-many relationship. Let's navigate back to Tinkerwell, and let's first retrieve the user we used before to add images for. So let's say user instance is equal to our user model, and we're gonna get the user where the ID is equal to 5, which is correct. Then we're going to define a new variable, which we will name latest image, which we will set equal to our user instance and chain the latest image method that we just defined. Once we perform our request, you will see that we have retrieved the latest image of the user. We could also retrieve the oldest image, where we need to replace the latest image property to the oldest image property. Once we perform our request, you will see that we have retrieved the oldest image, which is the same because we have only added 1 image. Even though the many-to-many relationship is already quite powerful, using the many-to-many polymorphic relationship blows it through the roof. The power of the many-to-many polymorphic relationship lies in its flexibility. With this type of relationships, you can easily create complex data structures that would have been difficult or impossible to create with a traditional many-to-many relationship. Now you might wonder, why would we use it? Well, the first reason is its flexibility. The many-to-many polymorphic relationship allows you to create complex data structures that would have been difficult or impossible to create with a traditional many-to-many relationship. Also, because of its code reusability. By creating a polymorphic relationship, you can reuse code across multiple models instead of duplicating it in each record. Now let's consider an example of our web application that has 3 models, the post, video, and the tag. The post and video models both can have many tags, and each tag can be associated with many posts and videos. Now at this point, I pretty much defined tons of relationships and I kind of got lost into my file. So let's clean up the post, video, and tag model first before we continue on. Let's open the post model and let's get rid of all the relationships that we have. Let's do the same thing for the tag model, just to clean it up. And let's also do it for the video model. So let's get rid of it. Alright. Now let's navigate to the CLI for a moment, because we do need to create a new migration right here. So let's say PHP artisan make me a model. We're going to name it taggable. And we're going to add a -m flag to it. The taggable model will basically create the many-to-many polymorphic relationships between the tag, post, and video models. It will basically create a relationship between the models for us. So let's hit enter. All right, let's navigate back to PHP Storm, scroll down and open our taggables table. And just like the other polymorphic relationships, we do need to add a couple additional columns right here. The first one will be a unsigned big integer with the name of tag_id. Then we need a second unsigned big integer, which will have a name of taggable_id. And we also need to define a table string, which is the taggable_type. Now the tag ID column stores the ID of the tag. The taggable ID column stores the ID of either the post or the video, where the taggable_type column stores the type of the model that the tag is associated with, which will be either the video model or the post model. So let's navigate back to the CLI and run the php artisan migrate command. And let's set up our relationships right now. We're going to start off inside the tag model. So let's navigate to PHP Storm and let's open the tag model, where we're going to define a public function taggables method. Right here, we're going to define a many-to-many polymorphic relationship between the tag and any other model that will be associated with it. So right here, we're going to return this morph to many, which is used to define the relationship. It accepts two arguments, the name of the related model, which in our case will be the taggable model, and the name of the polymorphic relationship, which will be taggable. Now let's open the post model because we do need to define a relationship here as well. Let's say public function tags. This method allows the model to be associated with multiple instances of the tag and the other way around as well. So we're going to return this morph to many. We're going to type int it to a morph to many as well. And this method also accepts two arguments, the name of the related model, which will be tag : class, and the name of the polymorphic relationship, which will be a string of taggable. Now let's copy this method that we have, and let's paste it inside the video model as well. Since it is a many-to-many relationship, we basically need to define the same method. Now with the relationships that we have set up right now, we can easily associate tags with posts and videos, using the attach and detach methods. So let's navigate back to Tinkerwell and see how we could play around with the many-to-many polymorphic relationship. Let's see which tags we have available by saying tag all, where you will see that we have a tag with ID number 1, 2, and 3 as well. So let's go right above our query and let's define a new variable named tag IDs. Let's set it equal to an array, and let's pass in the 3 IDs that we just retrieved. So 1, 2, and 3. Now to associate tags with posts using the many-to-many polymorphic relationship, we need to use the attach methods. But before we do that, we obviously need to retrieve a post. So let's go right below of it, and let's define a post instance, and let's set it equal to our post model, find, where the ID is equal to 1000. Then we could basically get rid of our tag query, and let me add a couple enters right here. All right. Then on our post instance, we could chain the tags method and chain the attach method right after it. Inside the attach method, we're going to pass in our tag IDs variable that we have created. Once we perform our request right here, you will see that null has been returned. And that's because the query we performed does not return anything. It simply attaches the specified tags to the post or video. To verify that the tags were successfully attached, we could basically navigate back to PHP Storm, open our database client, and let me load it up for a moment. Let's open the taggables table, where you will see that we have inserted 3 IDs, where the tag IDs are coming from our tag IDs variable. The taggable_ID column is equal to the post_ID value, and the taggable_type right here references to the model we used, which is the post model. Now let's mix it up a little bit by performing the same query for the video model, so you could see how we could retrieve the tags from a model. Let's navigate back to Tinkerwell. Let's replace our post model with the video model. Replace the instance name with video. Now let's quickly change the ID to 1. Once we perform it, you'll see that null has been printed out. We then navigate back to PHP Storm, refresh our table, you'll see that we have created 3 new rows where the module is video, the taggable ID is the video ID of 1, and we have added the tag IDs.